One evening, after finishing a long shift at a grocery store, a young girl helps an elderly man struggling with his groceries in the parking lot. To her, it's just a small act of kindness, but to the man, it means something more. Before leaving, he hands her a folded note, telling her she has earned it. When she opens it later, she finds not just heartfelt words, but a life-changing gift. This simple encounter sets off a ripple effect of kindness, proving that one moment, one act, and one belief in someone's potential can change everything. Stay until the end to see how this story unfolds, and if it inspires you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories like this. At just 16, Yasmin had already taken on more responsibilities than most people her age. While other teenagers spent their afternoons hanging out with friends or scrolling through their phones, Yasmin spent hers working at Grenu Market, a small but busy grocery store in town. Every day, after school, she would put on her faded name tag, tie her apron around her waist, and stand behind the register, scanning items and bagging groceries. The job wasn't glamorous, but it helped her family keep the lights on, and that was what mattered. Her mother worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs to make ends meet, yet money always seemed to run out before the month did. Every dollar was stretched, every expense calculated, and every sacrifice made with love. Yasmin saw the worry in her mother's eyes whenever the rent was due or when unexpected bills arrived, and she refused to let her struggle alone. She stepped up, taking on extra shifts when she could, even if it meant coming home exhausted. She had dreams, big ones. She wanted to be a journalist, to write stories that mattered, to give a voice to those who didn't have one. But dreams didn't pay the bills. For now, she focused on what was right in front of her: school, work, and making sure her little brother Malik never felt like they were struggling. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of Grenu Market, casting long golden streaks across the tiled floors. The usual hum of the store had quieted down as the evening rush faded, leaving only a handful of customers wandering through the aisles. Yasmin adjusted her worn-out name tag and forced a polite smile as she handed a customer their change. Her shift was almost over, and she could already feel the ache creeping into her legs from standing all day. She glanced at the clock above the checkout counter. Just a few more minutes. Soon she would take off her apron, step out into the cool evening air, and finally sit down. That thought alone was enough to push her through the last stretch. But just as she was wiping down her station, something caught her eye through the store's front window. An elderly man stood near an old sedan, struggling with a grocery cart. 2 heavy bags dangled precariously from the edges, and as he tried to lift them, his hands trembled slightly. The bags swayed, threatening to spill their contents onto the asphalt. Yasmin hesitated. She was exhausted. Every muscle in her body begged for rest. It would be so easy to pretend she hadn't seen him, to walk straight past and head home. But then, a familiar voice echoed in her head, the voice of her father, who had always told her, "Help whenever you can. That's how you make the world a better place than you found it." That was all she needed. Pushing aside her own fatigue, she stepped outside and approached the man with a warm smile. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like some help?" she asked gently. The man looked up, startled. His weathered face was lined with deep wrinkles, his piercing blue eyes carrying an intensity that made Yasmin pause. He wore a simple button-up shirt and faded jeans, nothing particularly striking. And yet, there was something about him, something that commanded quiet respect. For a moment he just studied her, as if trying to figure out why a stranger would offer to help. Then, his face softened, and he nodded. "That would be a very kind gesture, young lady," he said, his voice low and gravelly, carrying the weight of years. Without hesitation, Yasmin reached for the bags. They were heavier than she expected, the weight pulling at her arms. She adjusted her grip and steadied herself. "Where's your car?" she asked, looking around the parking lot. "Right over there," he said, nodding toward the sedan a few feet away. They walked together, the gravel crunching under their feet. As they reached the car, the man glanced at her. "Do you work at the store?" "Yes, sir," Yasmin replied. "I just finished my shift. My mom and little brother are inside getting groceries." The man nodded, as if that told him everything he needed to know. "You've got a lot on your plate." Yasmin shrugged, adjusting the weight of the bags in her arms. "It's nothing," she said lightly. "I just do what I can." Most people never noticed how much she carried on her shoulders. It felt strange to have someone acknowledge it. When they reached the trunk, she carefully set the bags inside, making sure nothing was crushed. The man watched her closely, an unreadable expression on his face. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you, young lady. That was very kind of you." Before Yasmin could brush it off, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to her. "Take this. You've earned it." She frowned slightly, confused. "What is it?" The man only smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Something to think about." Then, without another word, he adjusted his hat, climbed into his car, and drove off, leaving Yasmin standing in the parking lot, the note clenched in her hand. She stared at it for a long moment. She had no idea yet, but that small piece of paper was about to change everything. Yasmin walked home that evening, her mind racing. The folded note in her pocket felt heavier than it should, as if it carried something far more significant than just a thank you. When she arrived at her small apartment, the familiar aroma of her mother's cooking greeted her. Before she could even take off her shoes, Malik came running toward her, his sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor as he threw his arms around her waist. "I got the cereal," he announced proudly, holding up the brightly colored box. Yasmin smiled, ruffling his hair. "Good choice." She set her bag down and took a seat at the kitchen table, finally letting herself relax. But even as she sat there, her thoughts kept drifting back to the elderly man and the note he had given her. Across the room, her mother stood at the stove, stirring a pot. She glanced over her shoulder. "Long shift?" Yasmin nodded, stretching her tired arms. "Yeah, it was a long one, but I'm used to it." Malik was still excitedly shaking the cereal box as if it were some grand prize, completely unaware of Yasmin's distraction. She reached into her pocket, hesitating for a moment before pulling out the note and placing it on the table. "Someone gave me this," she said, her voice tinged with confusion. "It's strange." Her mother finally turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she walked toward the table. "Who gave it to you?" "Just some guy in the parking lot. I helped him with his groceries, and before he left, he handed me this." She tapped the folded paper lightly. "Didn't say much, just that I'd earned it." Her mother studied the note for a second, but didn't say anything. "We'll look at it after dinner." Later that night, after dinner, Yasmin lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She closed her eyes, but her mind wouldn't rest. It takes courage to pursue something like that. The man's words echoed in her head. What had he meant? And why did it feel like something was about to change? The next morning, as the soft morning light filtered through the curtains, Yasmin lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She had spent most of the night tossing and turning, her mind unable to let go of the folded note sitting on her nightstand. The weight of it felt almost unbearable, not in a physical sense, but in the way it occupied her thoughts. She had resisted opening it the night before, unsure if she was ready for whatever was inside. But now, with the quiet of the morning surrounding her, she knew she couldn't wait any longer. Taking a deep breath, Yasmin sat up, reached over, and carefully picked up the note. The paper felt slightly rough between her fingertips, as if it had been carried in someone's pocket for a long time before reaching her hands. Slowly, she unfolded it, smoothing out the creases as her eyes scanned the first few lines. The handwriting was neat, but had a slight slant to it. The kind of handwriting you'd expect from someone who had spent years signing important documents. It carried a sense of certainty and wisdom, a kind of weight that made her pulse quicken. Then, she began to read. Dear Yasmin, in the brief time we spoke, I could tell you are someone special. You remind me of someone I knew long ago. Someone who taught me that strength, kindness, and perseverance can overcome almost anything. Her breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the paper as she read the words again, letting them sink in. Someone special. No one had ever said that to her before, not in a way that felt this real. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued. It's rare to meet someone so young with such grace and maturity. I see all that you carry on your shoulders, and I want to help you on your way. Yasmin felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so much of her life doing what needed to be done, working, studying, helping at home, without ever stopping to think if anyone noticed. Most people only saw the surface, the polite cashier, the responsible daughter, the hard-working student. But this man, a stranger she had met for only a few minutes, had seen something more. Her heart pounded as she reached the final lines. Use this as you see fit, to help your family, to pursue your dreams, or simply to take a moment for yourself. But always remember, keep being who you are and never stop believing in your potential. A small folded piece of paper slipped from inside the note and landed on her lap. Confused, Yasmin picked it up and turned it over. A check. Her breath hitched as she stared at the amount written on it. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, struggling to process what she was holding. She had expected a simple thank you, maybe a kind word for helping an elderly man with his groceries. But this was more than just gratitude. This was a door opening to a future she had only dreamed of. The gesture from Clint Eastwood wasn't just about the money. It was something far greater than that. It was belief. For the first time in years, Yasmin felt truly seen. Not just as a girl working long hours to support her family, not just as another struggling teenager trying to make ends meet, but as someone with potential, someone worth investing in, someone who could become something more. She stared at the check again, still struggling to process what had happened. It wasn't just the financial support. It was the hope that came with it. The realization that her dreams weren't as impossible as she had convinced herself they were. For so long, she had accepted that becoming a journalist was just a distant goal, something to think about one day when life allowed it. But now she had the chance to start. When she told her mother, the reaction was almost the same as her own. Shock, disbelief, and then quiet gratitude. Her mother held the check for a long moment, shaking her head in amazement. This is real," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Yasmin nodded. "He gave it to me. He said I earned it." Together, they sat down at the small kitchen table and carefully planned out how to use the money wisely. They would pay off overdue bills, fix their old car so it wouldn't break down again, and, most importantly, set aside a portion for Yasmin's future, her dream of becoming a journalist. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on Yasmin's shoulders felt lighter. It was as though in a single moment, the burden she had carried for so long had lifted, and in its place there was something new. There was.
Inspired by Clint's generosity, Yasmin knew there was only one way to truly honor his kindness, by paying it forward. She started small. Using part of Clint's gift, she created a quiet fund at Grenu Market, where she worked. She never made a big announcement about it, never sought attention. Instead, she watched and listened. When a mother at the register hesitated before removing items from her cart because the total was too high, Yasmin discreetly covered the difference. When she noticed a child wearing shoes that were falling apart, she arranged for a new pair. When a teenager came in after school, counting loose change to buy a notebook, Yasmin made sure they left with a full set of supplies. It wasn't about the money. It was about making sure that someone, even for just a moment, felt seen, just like Clint had seen her. And soon, something incredible happened. People started noticing. Co-workers, customers. Without even realizing it, they too began helping in small ways. A teacher offered to tutor struggling students at no charge. A local baker left extra bread for families in need. A retired mechanic fixed a single mother's car for free. One act of kindness had sparked another, and another, and another. Yasmin had always believed in hard work, in doing what needed to be done. But now she believed in something even greater, the power of kindness to change a life. As she continued working toward her dream, she knew Clint's belief in her would guide her through every challenge. One day, when she finally achieved her goals, she would do for someone else what Clint had done for her. Because that's how kindness works. It never ends. It just keeps moving forward. Clint Eastwood's simple act of kindness had transformed Yasmin's life in ways neither of them could have predicted. What seemed like a small, fleeting moment, a young girl helping an elderly man with his groceries, became a turning point that reshaped her future. Through his belief in her potential, Yasmin discovered a strength she had always possessed but never fully recognized. This story is a powerful reminder that kindness is not just about giving, it's about seeing people for who they truly are, beyond their struggles, beyond their circumstances. Yasmin had spent years carrying the weight of responsibility, working tirelessly to support her family while quietly setting aside her own dreams. Clint's gesture wasn't just about financial support, it was about acknowledging her efforts, reminding her that her hard work and kindness mattered. One small act of generosity can have a ripple effect far beyond what we imagine. Clint's gift didn't just change Yasmin's life. It inspired her to help others, creating a cycle of kindness that spread through her community. This story teaches us that you don't have to be famous or wealthy to make a difference. A kind word, a helping hand, or simply believing in someone's potential can be life-changing. So the next time you have the opportunity to lift someone up, do it. You may never fully understand the impact of your kindness, but to someone else, it could mean everything. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that remind us of the power of kindness. See you in the next video.